Good afternoon. Welcome to the Virginia and West Virginia edition of our webinar series exploring state findings from American Farmland Trust's recently released Farms Under Threat 2040, Choosing an Abundant Future. Here is the agenda for our hour together. And before we get started, let me run through some quick logistics. If we can go to the next slide, please. Everyone has been muted. No need to worry about that. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, and we will be saving time at the end of the webinar for questions, you would go to your control panel. On the upper right-hand side, you see a yellow and orange arrow that opens and closes that control panel. Down below, you see a questions tab. You would hit that little box to the far right side of the questions tab, pop that open, and you can put your question or comments right in there. And again, we will be getting to those. Also on this control panel, you see a handouts bar. On the right-hand side, you can pop that out, and in that handout section, you will see a link to the full Farms Under Threat 2040 report, as well as the 2 state summaries that we will be talking about later in the webinar. Lastly, as we're going through the maps on the website, if the control panel is in the way, remember that you can just push that orange, click on that orange button, and that will miraculously disappear the control section. So we're recording this webinar. You will receive a link to the recording, and we would welcome you sharing it far and wide with whoever you would like, because we hope that this is viewed widely and broadly. So let me now introduce myself. I'm Chris Coffin. I wear 2 hats at American Farmland Trust. I direct AFT's National Agricultural Land Network, which is an information and peer learning network for those working to save farm and ranch land. It is a national network. We started it in 2020, and I'm glad, thank you, that it came back. We started it in 2020. It is a free network, and we encourage anyone who is interested in tools to save farmland and making the case on how to do that to join us. I'll talk a little bit more about it at the end. Co-hosting with me today is Jamie Mira. Jamie is the AFT Mid-Atlantic Regional Director, and she is based out of Washington, D.C. And we will get to Jamie in just a minute. For those of you not familiar with American Farmland Trust, we are a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. We are also the only national agricultural land trust. Some know us best by our No Farms, No Food bumper sticker. Before this bumper sticker, we had one that said, "It's not farmland without farmers." We understand agriculture, and we take a holistic approach to it. Our national initiatives and our regional programs focus not just on protecting the agricultural land base, but on the practices used on the land and on the farmers and ranchers who work the land, both the current generation of farmers and ranchers and those in the future. Our programs and research inform our state and federal policy advocacy and analysis. We work from farm fields and kitchen tables to the halls of Congress and the halls of state capitals, with 6 regional offices and a national office located in Washington, D.C. And with that, let me turn it over to Jamie.
Thanks so much, Chris, and thank you all for joining us today. We would like to recognize and thank USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service for their partnership and financial support of our Farms Under Threat research. Farms Under Threat is AFT's multi-year initiative to document the status of and threats to America's agricultural land base. NRCS has been invaluable in this entire research project, as has our research partner, Conservation Science Partners. For this particular report, we also collaborated with the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And now I'd like to welcome a very special guest, West Virginia Commissioner of Agriculture, Kent Leonhardt. Commissioner, I believe we have you on with us and that we've resolved any technical issues we had at the start. Is that right?
If you can hear me, I'm here.
Wonderful.
I'm here.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. So Commissioner Leonhardt is a longtime farmer operating a 380-acre farm in north central West Virginia. He and his wife raise sheep, cattle, and goats. The commissioner formerly served in the West Virginia State Senate for the 2nd District, and he retired from the U.S. Marine Corps as a lieutenant colonel. He holds a degree in wildlife management from the University of Missouri and an MBA from Central Michigan University. We are so glad to have you with us here today. I also want to mention that Secretary Matt Lohr from Virginia, unfortunately sends his regrets. He was unable to join us today. However, in the audience, we are joined by several of his colleagues from the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you again, Commissioner, for being here today. I've got a few questions for you that we'd like to ask. So you've had a chance to review the summary findings from the report, and I'm curious, what struck you most about the findings?
Well, one of the things that struck me most was about the timeliness of the report and the ideas. When you look back at, and I want to thank you all for hosting this webinar, and you're a great partner to have. We're lucky that a lot of people started farmland protection initiatives many years ago before we really knew there was going to be a crisis. So, what struck me about the report is the timeliness. When you look back over history, and cheap energy, economies of scale, labor issues, all kind of work towards the consolidated of agriculture. And we relied on that cheap energy and transportation and processing and good refrigeration, all those things to move that food to the markets in the cities and other areas. And those small farms that were providing for those local areas just slowly started to shrink away. And then you had the urbanization come in, and people started building on those farmlands. So we lost that direct connectivity to the land because people were interested in a cheap, affordable, and abundant food supply. And the way things were done, we were provided that. Nobody ever worried about where their next meal was coming from, unless you had financial issues within your family or other needs. But for the most part, the United States was growing, and still is, about 3 times the amount of food we as a nation need. But then when we came up with supply chain issues, as during the pandemic and the recent shortage of trucks and the increase in fuel prices, we're starting to see those shortages in the what we now call the supermarkets, because we lost all the corner grocery stores. And now we've become aware that we need to shorten that supply chain. And ever since I've been in office, I've been talking about this. We need to shorten that supply chain from where our food is produced and where it's consumed. There's a lot of good reasons for that, but the timeliness of your report kind of highlights that.
So how do you think this research can be used by the folks who are joining us for this webinar today to help save farmland and ranchland?
Well, what we have to understand is that some of the best ways to preserve farmland is to make farming profitable, to make sure that we can use the new technologies and the things that are on a small scale and make it profitable. Some of that's education. Some of that is getting the people that are going to the supermarkets, and because the supermarkets are consolidations of a lot of little markets from times past, people now go to the market and they buy for a week at a time. So more preservatives are used. The food is less healthy, more starches, more things that have changed our way of life and also our health conditions. So we have to have an education process along with what you all are doing for the protection of farmland so that people understand that getting something right off the farm is worth paying for and it's worth that farmer's effort.
Mm-hmm. And finally, Commissioner, what steps would you like to see state or local governments or even federal governments to take to reduce conversion of farmland?
Well, they obviously have to make people aware of the situation of it, and we have to continue that education process to the folks. And you talk about that Better Build Cities program. Well, maybe now that's better. Now it's very timely. You know, at first when this the globalization of our food markets and my generation, the baby boomers, they all wanted a single family house. They wanted a big lot. And the only way to do that was to purchase farmlands and then divide it up and get the 2 and 3 acre houses and stuff. But what we're seeing now with a lot of the millennials and all, they're not wanting that big yard to take care of. They're more interested in other things. And so maybe now's the time to use what you're talking about, your Better Built, to have that more consolidated, but then preserve that open space for people to enjoy and use and to grow the food that we need, that it's going to be more nutritious, locally grown.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Commissioner, for those really insightful comments. And now I'll turn it back to you, Chris.
Great. Thank you so much, Jamie. And thank you so much, Commissioner, for joining us. And I know I said we were going to wait to the end for questions and comments, but I just wanted to note, given that Jamie mentioned your military history, that we had somebody who promptly wrote in as a comment to say thank you for your service. And I think we all echo that. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for your service. And with that, Jamie and I are going to go off camera now so that we can devote more space here to the slides and so you can see the charts and the maps better. So let's dive in now to the methodology and findings from the report. So our first two Farms Under Threat reports, Farms Under Threat State of America's Farmland, which we released in 2018, and Farms Under Threat State of the States, released in 2020, mapped past conversion of agricultural land, first looking from 1992 to 2012, and then from 2001 to 2016. In this report, we're going in a different direction. We're looking forward. We're using that past conversion data to model and predict future conversion of farm and ranch land out to 2040. So we started with our Farms Under Threat State of the State analysis of that conversion from 2001 to 2016. And as a reminder, that analysis mapped conversion of land into two different types: urban and high density development and low density residential development. So let's talk about those two for just a minute and what we mean by them. Urban and highly developed is the traditional culprit in farmland conversion. It's been mapped and tracked for many years. It includes residential, industrial, and commercial areas typically found in and around cities. Important to note, it does include rural industrial sites such as oil and gas infrastructure and solar development. Anything of a certain scale, anything that can be identified by satellite remote sensing as built up. Low density residential development has become a more pervasive culprit, and AFT worked with conservation science partners to pioneer an approach to map and quantify the impacts of this type of development on the agricultural land base. So low density residential development ranges from lower density subdivisions to larger farmettes and ranchettes. Typically, this kind of scattered large lot housing fragments the agricultural land base and makes production harder for the farms and ranches that remain. It's important to note here that some agriculture can be found on this low density residential land. And important to note that some of these smaller farm parcels, especially those near urban centers, can be quite profitable. However, our research has found that once land has been converted to low-density residential, it is far more likely to be converted further to urban and highly developed land. So, starting with our historical data, we projected into the future with a business as usual scenario. Basically, this was a straight line projection using the same annual conversion rate as what we documented in our state of the states analysis to predict both the level and location of conversion by 2040. We adjusted the model to account for projected population growth. Building off of that scenario, we developed two alternative scenarios, which we'll get to in a minute. In each of the three scenarios, we also mapped the coastal flooding risk that is projected by sea level rise. Once we had our projection of conversion and flooding risk, we quantified the effects of these scenarios on both agricultural land types. So what's the land that's likely to be converted? Is it cropland, pasture land, woodland? As well as on the quality of the land converted. As with any modeling exercise, there are some caveats. Most importantly, we were not able to account for local zoning. Land use regulations are inherently local, and there is no national database to tap into. This means that our maps represent the general pattern and rough amount of conversion that is likely based on those patterns from 2001 to 2016. They do not reflect what may be allowed or prohibited on the ground through local land use regulations. Our modeling also does not include the impact of water scarcity and potential fallowing of land because of water scarcity or even salinization. Mapping this impact involves a complex interplay of many variables and was simply beyond the scope of our analysis. You'll see in the website, though, when we get there, that we did include a data overlay from World Resource Institute's Aqueduct, which offers some projections about water availability in the future. So here are the three scenarios we modeled. First, business as usual, as we talked about. The second one is what we call runaway sprawl. This envisions a scenario where sprawl actually gets worse. And we know that this is entirely possible. It could be driven by high housing costs that we're seeing in urban areas, and we're seeing more remote work opportunities, which will only be improved as rural broadband expands. In fact, some parts of the country may already be on this trajectory. Lastly, we modeled the future we hope for, better built cities. This scenario envisions successful efforts to reduce the footprint of residential, commercial, and industrial development on productive ag land. While the scenario still results in the conversion of some agricultural land, it envisions a future with vibrant, compact cities and towns and abundant farm and ranch land to meet the needs of the future. A quick look at the assumptions that went into these three scenarios. As you can see here in business as usual, we used that rate from 2001 to 2016 for both the urban and high density and the low density residential rate. We did adjust the urban and high density conversion rate for increases in population growth because we know there's a strong correlation between population growth and urban and high density development. In the runaway sprawl, there is no similar, we left the historical rate for urban and high density, but we increased the rate of low density residential development because there's so much of it to have that be 50% higher. And in better built cities, we went the opposite way. We said, what would it look like if in fact we could reduce that impact by 50% of low density residential development? And if we could cut the rate of urban and high density development by 25%. So those were the assumptions that we used. Let's now look at the impact of each scenario. There on the gray is what you see as the 11 million acres that have already, that we showed in our last analysis of land that had been converted from 2001 to 2016. That was 11 million acres in this century alone. Under the business as usual or worse runaway sprawl, we could see another 18.4 or worse yet 24.4 million acres converted or threatened by conversion. Conversely, if we go the route of more compact development and make smart choices about how and where we site it, we could reduce that conversion to 11 million acres. So I know you're thinking 11 million acres, is that really the best case scenario? We appreciate that development, including renewable energy development, is necessary and the need for affordable housing options is acute. While it may be possible for cities and towns to be even more compact in their growth, and we hope that they can be, we chose what we believed was a realistic scenario. So the next two slides, we hope help in showing how Virginia and West Virginia compare to other states. This slide shows the projected total acres converted by county. The darker the rust or orange, whatever you want to call it, the more acres converted, and not surprisingly, given the size and scale of Texas, California, Arizona, you see a lot of very dark there. Where it changes, and on this next slide, which is the percent of agricultural land that is projected to be developed. And here you see a different pattern with the east half of the US showing a much more dark red because in fact it's reflecting quite a lot of conversion on what is smaller acreages in general. So now looking at this next slide, you see a chart of the top 12 most impacted states in the country. Virginia, you can see, is in the top 12 for both projected total acres of agricultural land converted and percent of agricultural land converted. Obviously, these are not lists you want to be on. The modeling projects that Virginia will lose over 836,000 acres of ag land, which represents 10.2% of its agricultural land base under the runaway sprawl scenario. And just a note to point out, Harrisonburg County in Virginia, we have a list of top 12 counties. And in fact, Harrisonburg County ranks in the top 5 counties nationally for the greatest percent of agricultural land projected to be converted by 2040. Going to the next slide, another key finding relates to impacts on our very best agricultural land. For previous reports, AFT created the first ever index of agricultural land quality that looked at land's productivity, versatility, and resilience. We call this the PVR index. Land over a certain PVR threshold is land we consider to be nationally significant, or land that is best suited for long-term cultivation and food production. While this land is concentrated in certain parts of the country, every state has some nationally significant land, as you can see in this map. What we find in our future projections is that conversion of this land is likely to be higher than conversion of other agricultural land for precisely the reasons why it is good for agriculture. It's flat, it's well drained, it's relatively free of rocks. This makes it highly desirable for development. The loss of this land is especially concerning. This is land that can produce the highest yields of crops and livestock with the least environmental impacts. Our modeling shows that nearly half of the projected conversion from 2016 to 2040 will occur on this land, even though it represents less than 40% of the country's total farm and ranch land. The more nationally significant land converted, the more reliant we become on marginal land for food production. And to put this potential loss of 9 million acres of nationally significant land in perspective, the total acreage of land in the U.S. devoted to fruit, nut, and vegetable production is just 1 million more acres, 10.4 million acres to be exact. So I'm now going to turn it over to Jamie, who's going to talk us through a couple more slides.
Thank you, Chris. The next finding we want to highlight relates to coastal flooding as a result of projected sea level rise. We mapped what this might look like in 2040 based on 7.5 inches of additional sea level rise. We found that 450,000 acres of farmland and ranchland could be flooded by 2040, including 1,600 acres in Virginia. This number does not include salinization of soils and groundwater, which will jeopardize many more acres even before land is inundated. Additionally, we found that nearly 500,000 acres of existing UHD and LDR land will be flooded nationally, causing some residents to seek more stable housing. The result? Another 2.7 million acres of agricultural land nationally could be converted to development. In Virginia, 8,500 acres of agricultural land are at risk due to sea level rise displacing existing development. One of the other threats we are highlighting with this report is the threat that solar development poses to agricultural land. To be clear, the American Farmland Trust supports renewable energy development. However, we think it's essential that we plan carefully so that our most productive, versatile, and resilient land is not compromised. We also think it's possible for agriculture and solar to coexist in mutually beneficial ways. So this map shows the projected acres of utility scale solar photovoltaic energy generation facilities by state in 2040. This data comes from the decarbonization with electrification scenario of the U.S. Department of Energy's Solar Future Study. That study estimates that there will need to be 7.4 million acres of utility scale solar in place by 2040 to meet the Biden administration's energy goal. This next map shows the percent of undeveloped land projected to be used for solar development based on that same Department of Energy Solar Future Study. We did model conversion of land to solar development, but did not include that data layer in this report because of some issues with the data. There is information about the solar modeling results in our solar technical paper that is available through our Farmland Information Center. We will also be releasing a solar white paper later this year. The most important findings were that 83% of the projected solar development by 2040 will be sited on agricultural land, and nearly half of the projected solar will be sited on nationally significant land. Now we're going to dive into the data available for West Virginia and Virginia on the interactive website. And for this, we're going to be joined by our colleague, Beth Frazier, who will be our navigator. Thank you so much, Beth. And Chris, I'll hand it back to you.
Great, thank you so much. So we are now going to dive in, and I believe, and Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong, that we are going to go to Virginia first, but I might be wrong. I can't remember. So, but first, before you get anywhere, when you go to the website, and there is a link to the website or will be in the chat, you come to this cover page. It's just a quick what we did, what we found, what you can do, help for information. To get out of that, you simply click on that little X on that cover right there where Beth is pointing. It gets you out, and if you want to get back to it, you go to About up there on the upper right-hand part of your screen. Let's talk about what else is up there in that right-hand corner for the moment. You'll see a how-to tab up there. That will take you to a 5-minute video that explains how to use the various data layers and what is included in the various data layers in each of the scenarios. Next to that, there's a View Report tab. That takes you to the Farmland Information Center, where you can find the full report, the executive summaries, and technical papers, and the past State of the States report. We are also making our geospatial data layers available to anyone who would like them. If you would like to request it, again, there's a Request Data tab. Beth just clicked on it. This is the request form. Just fill it out and we will be back in touch with you. So now, am I right? I guess we're going to go wherever Beth takes us to. I don't know if that's Virginia or West Virginia. Ah, it's West Virginia. Excellent. Okay. So here we go. And we're going to walk through this sort of cover, the information down below first, and then we are going to go back and look more at the mapping. So you see here the both the state level data on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, what comes up is whatever county your cursor happened to be on when you clicked on the state. So for West Virginia, you can see that virtually the entire projected conversion is low density residential, that lighter color orange. For Fayette County here on the right-hand side, there's more urban and highly developed land that is likely to be converted, or the conversion is more likely to be to urban and highly developed land. But again, you see the numbers differ by the 3 different scenarios. Going down, we show what the impact is going to be on what we consider to be that nationally significant land, or the higher quality land, the higher PVR index in each state. So when you look here in West Virginia, you see that 68% of the conversion statewide is likely to be on the better quality land. So again, this is concerning because of that reliance. Then the higher quality the land that we develop, the more we rely on more marginal land for meeting those particularly food production needs into the future. Looking below, we see the type of land that is likely to be converted, and here in West Virginia, it's a pretty even split between cropland, pasture land, and woodland. And a note about this woodland is not all forest land in West Virginia. It is woodland that is associated with a farm. We did this type of modeling for our State of the States report in 2020, where we are able to look at what that woodland associated with farm units and be able to model that potential conversion. So that's what that woodland number refers to. And below that, you see that low density residential development is land that has been converted to low density residential development is 4 times more likely in West Virginia anyway to be further converted to urban and highly developed land. So that's what you come to when you get to the landing page for each state. You will see for the state the download report, and if you click on that, that takes you to what we think is a nice 2-page document that is easily printed off and handed out to anybody you want to be talking to about farmland loss. So we hope that folks will find this useful, encourage you to, again, share these widely with folks. So here you see the basic number, the 157,600 acres of projected conversion under business as usual. The thing that we want to point out is that what we have done is to do some equivalency here, and the impact of that type of loss, which could be the equivalent of losing 1,300 farms, $30 million in farm output, 2,800 jobs that are in agriculture. We also see here the hardest hit counties in West Virginia. These are the counties with the most projected conversion, and we are going to go to those in a minute, of Berkeley, Jefferson, and Preston. The rest of this has good additional information that you can see. Again, it gives you sort of projected conversion, that statistic about the more likelihood of low density residential being further converted, and that development choices matter. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jamie and to Beth, who are going to give us and take us on a cruise, I think, through West Virginia first, and then we will go to Virginia.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, we will take a cruise through West Virginia first, and let's take a look at one of those hardest hit counties. Beth, can you take us to Berkeley County, please? So as Chris said, what you do is you just scroll in and you find your county. Thank you so much, Beth. And then Beth, if you go to the drop-down menu on the left side and pick Runaway Sprawl, and then go to the drop-down menu on the right and choose Better Built Cities. Thank you. And here we are, pretty well zoomed in. Thank you. So here you can see a real stark difference in development between Runaway Sprawl and the Better Built Cities scenario in Berkeley County, as well as in some of the surrounding areas too. Low density residential here, which you see in orange, is really a significant issue. And then as you see in the graphs below, as Chris just pointed out, the greatest type of conversion is the low density residential. Under the Runaway Sprawl scenario, we're projecting almost 32,000 acres of farmland conversion compared to almost 12,000 acres under the Better Built Cities. Chris mentioned earlier that 86% of West Virginia's conversion is projected to occur on the state's best land under the business as usual scenario. And for Berkeley County, that percentage is 82%, which, Beth, if you scroll us down a little bit, you can find where those numbers are. There you go. Thank you. Wonderful. So Beth, let's head over to Virginia now and check out one of Virginia's hardest hit counties. Let's go to Loudoun County, please. Wonderful, thank you. And again, go to the drop-down menu on the left side and pick Runaway Sprawl, and the drop-down on the right for Better Built Cities. Super. Again, you can see a significant difference in development between the Runaway Sprawl and the Better Built Cities scenario, with significant conversion really running through the central and western portion of Loudoun County. You can see a lot of urban and high density development in red, and even more low density residential development in orange. Here we see in the graph below that under the Runaway Sprawl scenario, nearly 32,000 acres of farmland are projected to be converted to development, while the Better Built Cities scenario projects a little over 17,000 acres of conversion, so reduced almost by half. If you scroll down a little further, I see you're already there. You can see the acres of Virginia's best farmland projected to be converted between 2016 and 2040, and how that breaks down into cropland, pasture land, and woodland, and that 56% of Virginia's conversion is projected to occur on the Commonwealth's best land in the business as usual scenario. And in Loudoun County specifically, that percentage of projected conversion is 62%. So again, very significant. While we are in the website, I want to mention a piece of the research related to farmland protection. To show the relationship between compact growth and farmland protection, we modeled what it would look like to add a substantial increase in permanent farmland protection in selected metro areas, and Washington, D.C. was one of those areas. You can access the maps that were produced for this thought exercise. Beth is very helpfully showing us how to do that. You can find that in that drop-down menu that was just pulled up. We don't have time to explore this data layer in detail today, but the intent is to show how the conversion pattern might change if 10% of the agricultural land base, or about 86,500 acres, was protected in the DC area. This modeling may be helpful in guiding future investments in the state PACE program. More information about this part of the Farms Underfoot research can be found on pages 34 through 36 of the report. So that's a quick run through of the mapping tool. And now, Chris, I'll turn it back over to you. Chris, are you still connected?
I'm still there. She is.
I'm so sorry. So sorry, I was talking to myself. So thank you so much, Jamie. Thank you so much, Beth. And just to point out that we didn't show it, but there is a similar 2-page summary for Virginia that has all that relevant information. And again, we hope people will use that with to help make the case for the need for reducing the footprint of development and increasing permanent farmland protection. So now that we've talked through the findings, we want to take a few minutes to just talk about action. What can each of us do to help choose an abundant future? Our report has policy recommendations in each of these 4 categories and at every level of government. So if you are a county or a municipal official, or a state legislator, or a state agency employee, or a congressional staffer, we hope that you can find a recommendation in here that you would like to champion. Please let us know if we can provide you with any additional information about any of the policy ideas in the report. If you are a farmer, rancher, landowner, nonprofit staffer, community advocate, we encourage you to share and discuss these recommendations with your elected and agency representatives and partners. So let me highlight just a few things that we discuss in the recommendations. Under encouraging smart growth and compact development require a foundation of good local planning. In both Virginia and West Virginia, comprehensive plans are where the rubber meets the road, especially when it comes to promoting compact development in rural areas. And as we've seen for both states, far and away the most conversion is going to be that low density residential development that is happening more in rural areas. And so thinking about the need and value of comprehensive planning becomes very important. And it's also important that this report gives county level data, recognizing that there are limitations in using it on the map front because of that caveat about local zoning. But it is still giving that county level data that is hugely important to a comprehensive planning effort. So at the local level, engaging in comprehensive plan development and review is critically important. We hope folks will be involved in that, and looking at the state's support for that local comprehensive planning is very important in order for that to happen well. So protecting agricultural land, both states have done a good job of doing that. We commend both states for their work on farmland protection. Congress will be writing a new farm bill next year. An important program in that bill is the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, which helps to fund the purchase of agricultural conservation easements from willing farmers and ranchers. More funding for that program would help to protect more farm land in Virginia and West Virginia. Advancing smart solar siting. This is something that AFT has been doing a lot of work on. Local governments can ensure that best practices are followed when siting solar on farmland. This includes best practices around the construction, around the operation of, and around the decommissioning of solar development to preserve soil health, water resources, and from a farmer perspective, the ability to farm the land during and after the life of the project. States can invest in additional research around agrivoltaics or dual-use solar and provide incentives for dual-use solar development. And supporting farmland access, where we see some of the greatest need and success in expanding land access, is in helping to make connections between farm seekers and older farmers and farmland owners. This can be done through formal farm link programs or other ways of providing technical assistance, especially that customized, individualized assistance to help older farmers and landowners in thinking through succession strategies and identifying potential successors, and to help farm seekers identify and assess new land opportunities. We also want to point out the importance of addressing heirs' property issues and helping landowners with that, which can be an obvious barrier to both transfer of land and protection of land. And let me now turn it back to Jamie.
Great, thank you, Chris. Community planning is critically important to smart growth. As part of this planning, AFT encourages communities to plan proactively for agriculture. This involves these 4 basic principles, which you see here, principles that can work in tandem with efforts to plan for smarter, more compact development. Many resources on planning for agriculture can be found on our Farmland Information Center website, and we sure hope you'll check those out. AFT has been working to protect the land, people, and good farming practices of Virginia and West Virginia for the past 40 years. I just want to briefly mention some of our more recent current work in those states. Through our Sustainable Grazing Project in Virginia, we are working with cattle producers to enhance the region's environmental and economic viability and improve markets and access to farmland for new producers. We're doing this through holistic management strategies that sequester carbon, improve soil health, support farms, and promote community well-being. In partnership with the Black Family Land Trust, Cooperative Extension, and many, many others, some of whom are joining us today, AFT is hosting a number of Women for the Land learning circles in Virginia aimed at helping women farmers and non-operating landowners adopt conservation practices. In the past 2 years alone, we've reached more than 100 women farmers and landowners in Virginia and supported these farmers in implementing conservation practices like installing permanent fencing to keep livestock from streams, creating nutrient management plans, and adopting intensive rotational grazing practices. Working with more than 24 organizations, AFT is creating the Regenerate Virginia Action Plan designed to advance regenerative agriculture in Virginia. We will release the action plan and begin this ambitious work in partnership with organizations across the Commonwealth starting this fall. And finally, we are also partnered with farmland preservation groups to increase awareness and adoption of soil health principles and practices on preserved land through AFT's Soil Health Stewards Program. Improving soil can help agricultural land be more productive and more valued as a community resource. So I will pause there and I'll turn it back to you, Chris.
Great. Thank you so much, Jamie. We are now going to go to questions. So if people have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And I think before we go to questions, I hope that Commissioner Leonhardt is still with us. And if you are, Commissioner, if you would like to share any final thoughts with us before we go to questions, or whether you have any questions of your own. And he may not have been able to stay on. So if we don't hear from him,
I'm here.
There you are. Terrific.
Okay.
Any last
the
thoughts?
Going.
I know.
No, I'm here, and it was great to get the more verbal detail of the report. And, you know, as like I mentioned earlier, it's very striking about the timeliness. And you chose the two counties that to me were no surprise in West Virginia that are the most impacted because they're closest to DC. The other county that was mentioned is the third most is Preston, but that's actually close to one of our fastest growing counties, Monongalia and Morgantown, where WVU is located. So that was a little bit of a surprise to me, but it was not that much of a shock. When we talk about that region, as we discussed earlier, Chris, we talk about the Chesapeake Bay impact of urbanization and agriculture, where you know, we've been making great strides since the Clean Water Act in 1972. And I tell a story about when I was stationed at Fort Meade as the commanding officer and an analyst there. I often fished and crabbed in the Chesapeake Bay, and the people from the Bay Area told me years ago how polluted the bay was, and we're making progress. So we're still working towards that, but those areas of the urbanization is getting greatly impacted. So all the work we did with farming, when that land gets converted into housing developments, you know, the farmers are using just what they need in nutrients on their lands. They don't want the runoff because that's losing money to them. But the homeowner who wants the beautiful green lawn doesn't do a soil test, puts on what he thinks he wants to do. And then you have the macadam and the concrete, and that all runs off and gets down into the bay, and the farmer's still getting blamed. So there's another good reason to make sure we do our better planning is to make sure that we understand where the pollutants of the Chesapeake Bay come from. So that's all very important. On the solar side of things, you know, we have about 10,000 acres that the Department of Ag operates in farmland for the state. And solar companies have approached me, and they only want to put those solar panels on the best farmland there is, all the cropland and everything else. And we keep wanting them to go, let's use some of the marginal. Let's put it on stilts so we can graze livestock underneath it and have dual use in the solar planning. So as legislators and county planners on that, when you hear about a solar project coming in, look and ask the question, can we use the dual purpose so we don't lose the farmland totally to a solar farm? And then we can accomplish an awful lot. But those are some of the striking things that we need to be on the lookout for.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner. Those were some great insights from you. And I would say that AFT, again, has done a lot of work and will continue to do more work on smart solar siting. And we have quite a wealth of information available on our website already, and some good studies. So be on the lookout for continued more resources available and programming coming from us on that. I want to get to a couple of questions. There are a few that are sort of clarifications around things. So the question was, does urban high density development include utility scale solar? The answer is yes, it would. It would show up. But the caveat there is that, again, that UHD data layer is derived from the historical, or the all of our data to 2040 is based on the conversion from 2001 to 2016. And as we know, a lot of the growth in solar, utility scale solar, has been since 2016. So it is probably an underestimate of the amount of urban and high density development that will occur going forward, because there was not a significant amount of utility scale solar that was happening before 2016. The next question is, does our data include land already under conservation easement? That answer is yes. You don't see that data layer. We have created a data layer which we have called the Protected Agricultural Land Data Layer. And we will be making that available to partners. In fact, it may already be available now, but I don't think so. I think it's coming out later this fall. That was used as we were doing the projections. It is not included. You don't see that on the map, but it was incorporated. So you should not be seeing a conversion on places where there is underlying conservation easements. There was one other question related to data. Let me see if I can get to that, which is something about, hang on. Can you still access the older PVR GIS data layers? On the website, I can now only find the new map. And that older data that demonstrated the PVR scores geospatially was valuable. Absolutely agree with the questioner there that that was valuable. And I will honestly say that I don't know the answer. I think that answer is yes. I will pause to see if Jamie or Beth know the answer to that. If not, we will, when we send around the recording, we will send out answers to any unanswered questions or clarifications, and then that is one we certainly can clarify. But Jamie or Beth, either of you happen to know the answer to that?
I believe it is still available, but we will check on that, and we will, as Chris mentioned, we will include that in our follow-up email and let you know.
Right. Okay. So then we have a question that Jamie, I think is best for you to answer. I think the sustainable grazing staff works in northern Piedmont of Virginia. Is there a plan to expand that to other parts of Virginia?
We sure hope so. Yes, it is within a very local area, 8-county geographic focus. Our hope is to be able to expand that not only throughout Virginia, but throughout the Mid-Atlantic region as well. And we're working with partners and actively exploring potentials for not only kind of replicating, expanding that elsewhere, but then also partnering with and helping to amplify some other work around this peer-to-peer mentorship. That's such a big part of the Sustainable Grazing Project, and looking for ways to kind of lift up and amplify some of the existing work that many of you who are on the phone are already doing. So.
Great. And I think we have two more questions here. Here's a comment and a question. You mentioned Harrisonburg County as a major development area. Is this the area surrounding Harrisonburg City in Rockingham County? So actually, that's a very good question. Jamie or Beth, do you know the answer to that?
I could speculate, but what I'd rather do, unless Beth, you know the answer to that, is to take a closer look and to get back to you. Unless Beth,
Great.
yeah.
Because the questioner says, I see on the website maps that there's a large increase in runaway sprawl in eastern Rockingham County. How do we find out why that is projected and how is that determined? So let me just say the projection is what it is. Again, it is based on past conversion patterns. And then when we look at the runaway sprawl, we projected actually an increase from those past conversion patterns. So that is, you can learn more about our methodology in reading the full report. That will explain in further detail how we derive those projections. And then the last question, which I think maybe Jamie, this one is for you, and I assume that this is for this part of Virginia. Is there funding to help if there's interest in purchasing land to specifically preserve? Well, now here's a question. It says, is there funding to help to purchase land for agriculture? I don't know if the questioner means purchasing land or purchasing conservation easements. So do you want to speak a little bit to purchase of easements in Virginia? Oh, did I lose Jamie? Jamie, can you hear me? We cannot hear you. Okay, well, we seem to have lost Jamie's audio, or otherwise we've lost my audio.
Chris, we can hear you. We can't hear Jamie. Let's go ahead and wrap up.
Okay. All right. With that, any unanswered questions? Since we seem to have lost Jamie's audio, we will send answers to any unanswered questions when we send out the link to the registration. So we want to thank you, Jamie, even though we can't hear you. We know that we know that you can hear us. We are very grateful. And Commissioner Leonhardt, thank you again so much for joining us, and we hope everybody has a great rest of the afternoon, and please do share the results of this study far and wide. Thank you all for listening in. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Great, thanks.